Welcome to the training provided by the Office of Leadership Engagement on developing inclusive organizations. My name is Meredith and I work in the office here at NAU and I'll be guiding you through this training. First off, why should student organizations care about this type of thing and aim for inclusivity and accessibility? So creating a more inclusive and accessible university increases involvement and feelings of belonging within the entire student body. I'd love to define a few terms that are used throughout this presentation. So inclusivity is the process of providing equal access to opportunities and resources to marginalized groups, while accessibility is the degree of usability and availability of a product or service. So keep in mind when we talk about a product or service in regards to student organizations, we'll be talking about its identity, its reputation, and what the organization does. And there's a lot of material that we could cover on this subject matter, but this training is meant to be an introductory level course to encourage more inclusivity and accessibility on campus and to teach some basic information so that you can start using it in your student orgs. So one concept that is tied to this is universal design, also known as inclusive design. This is the belief and methodology of creating buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other statuses. What's really cool about this is that it not only gives access to digital content for people with disabilities, but also non-native English speakers. It increases audience engagement, it minimizes legal risk, and it continues to commit to diversity and inclusion efforts. So across all marketing techniques and event planning for student organizations, we should be aiming for universal design. And there are 7 principles of it. There's equitable use, so ensuring that all users can use, for example, the flyer or the online website, what have you. Flexibility in use, which allows users multiple methods of use. So for people who do need to make adaptations, they can do so. Simple and intuitive use, so essentially just not overly complex. Perceptible information, considering legibility, having pictures and verbal content and potentially even tactile content. Tolerance for error is minimizing risks or hazards with an event or, again, any type of online media. Low physical effort regards minimizing exhaustion, since those with disabilities or some ability levels can be exhausted more easily or can have more physical challenges. So if it's really easy effort, it should be easier for all ability levels to participate. And finally, size and space for usage, which will help ease navigation and participation. This training is split into 2 main areas that were previously discussed through those 7 principles. But first, we're going to be talking about accessible marketing, and then later on, we'll talk a little bit more about inclusive event planning. On this slide, you'll actually see an example of an inclusive poster, and you can see that small minor changes to what we're doing already can sometimes drastically impact the accessibility of your materials. One really helpful resource for accessible marketing would be the accessibility section of the NAU Visual Identity Guide. There are different markers within this section, which include the overview, some definitions, some FAQs, some additional supports on campus, and then best design practices. If you don't save anything else from this PowerPoint, this would be a really important one to bookmark if you can. There are a wide variety of marketing techniques, right? Online flyering, bulletin board flyering, tabling, email blasts. What we recommend is that for all marketing materials and marketing efforts, you are following the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. The reason for this is with just a few minor tweaks, it can be incredibly accessible for both online and in person. So you can create one flyer and bam, you're done. So the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or more commonly known as WCAG or WCAG, there are 4 main principles. They're very similar to the 7 principles of universal design, which include Can the information be perceived? Can all users operate the material? Does the content make sense at typically something like a 7th grade reading level so that everyone can read and understand? And finally, robust. Does it work and get interpreted reliably across a wide variety of users and technologies? And this is to ensure that all online content is accessible to as many people as possible. There are 3 standards of WCAG. This includes A, AA, and AAA. At the university broadly, we aim for AA standard, which increases abilities for individuals who use assistive technology to access your material. AAA is the highest and what we're aiming for if we can reach it, and that is that your content is accessible to 95 to 99% of people. This can get a little complicated, of course, so I hyperlinked the WCAG checklist. So after you create a flyer, you can go through the checklist, see which criteria you meet, which criteria you can make a minor change for, and that way it's super easy for you to be trying to meet these WCAG guidelines. Additionally, these guidelines are typically required in workplace settings, so it's a great way to practice before you enter the workforce. Next, I want to go over some key terms for accessibility. Assistive technology is any product, device, or equipment used to maintain, increase, or improve functional capabilities of users. A common example of this would be glasses. However, a lot of assistive technology exists on things like computers and laptops and websites that a lot of people may not be as familiar with. For example, there are screen magnifiers, screen readers, touch screen displays, and speech recognition programs. Alternative text, also known as alt text, are the written descriptions of images. So it's really important when using alt text to describe what's important in the picture and use punctuation. And if you could have detailed descriptions of data in tables, charts, or graphs, that would be really helpful. So the main idea is to be concise and descriptive, yet simple and meaningful. Some reasons why we want to include alternative text is that, first off, this is for screen reader users that cannot see the image. However, images also fail to load, and it can actually help with search engine optimization. If someone tries to put in some keywords, if those keywords are on your image, they can still be searched. Next is reading order. This is the priority in which screen readers voice the information of the material. And so it is really important to always review this order before submitting a finished product. There are accessibility features within PowerPoint, for example, that can help you double check this order before you finish. Closed captioning. This is one type of assistive technology to assist users with hearing impairments. There are 2 types of captioning, open and closed. Open means it's permanently on the video. Closed typically means it needs to be toggled on. So this is important when you're having like a live virtual meeting or when you're uploading videos for your organization to be including some type of captioning, and if it's closed, to provide instructions on how to turn it on. Descriptive audio is a voiceover with additional description of visual elements. So when you're supplying materials for your student org, just look out for materials that have these features, because people who do not have visual impairments can still use these and sometimes even get more information, while it is also more inclusive to those that do have visual impairments. Finally, differentiation of text. So for all text, you should check for legibility and readability. If you need to squint, it may be better to change the font or size of the text. Online, font shouldn't be smaller than 16 pixels or 12 points. Next, we have color contrast. I've hyperlinked my favorite color contrast checker on here, but essentially contrast is the difference between 2 or more things. And WCAG guidelines require that there is a certain level of contrast between text and the background behind text to ensure people with some visual challenges can read the text. It also decreases fatigue when you have a higher contrast. There's a few other things to keep in mind about text. So visually, you should be making sure that it is legible, easy to read, but there's other features too. So people with color blindness can benefit from shading or textures and patterns on like bar graphs and things like that, so they can also interpret the chart without it having to be completely read out loud. And then some documents like Word docs have features like styles where it can read out like bolded text. If you click the style rather than just bolding, screen readers will read that style so that information gets portrayed. On the topic of color contrast, NAU has developed accessible color combinations of the NAU themes. And so if you look at this chart and its associated key, X indicates that the color combination is approved for both small and large text. Meanwhile, the O indicates that the color combination is only approved for large text. So keep that in mind. And if you're trying to do something with NAU branding, you can look at these color codes and make sure that, for example, you're not putting sky on top of white because that does not meet color contrast requirements. Next, here are some tips or additional things to think about. Number one, for text outlines, ensure that they're thick enough for individuals with visual impairments. Number two, for screen readers, always hyperlink keywords with URLs. Only type the full URL when converting to physical marketing materials. Number three, under the Review tab, you can check accessibility on PowerPoints. When you resolve each error, your work is that much easier and better for people to use. And number four, when using tables, be sure to include headers for the columns and rows within the table to better assist screen reader users. Finally, I want to leave you with the accessibility checklist. This is so that you can double check if your material is accessible. We developed this within the Office of Leadership and Engagement, and so this is designed specifically for the basics for student orgs. One is your title descriptive and meaningful. Next is alt text on all images and logos. Is there sufficient color contrast? Are there multiple inclusive methods to convey meaning, i.e. not just color? Are images of text not included anywhere? Is there meaningful language on hyperlinks? For example, it doesn't just say click me, it says this is the registration link hyperlinked. And finally, on videos, is there audio and captions or audio description? If you meet these, you're doing great. We're going to now start the accessible event planning section of this training. So you'll see an image on your right which says clearing a path for people with disabilities clears a path for everyone. And you can see an individual in a wheelchair asking, could you please shovel the ramp? And the shoveler is saying, all these other kids are waiting to use the stairs. When I get through shoveling them off, then I will clear the ramp for you. And the original person replies, but if you shovel the ramp, we can all get in. And so this is why it's important to, when planning events, consider how to make it accessible, because then you're hitting a larger audience at NAU and the community. Some additional resources are offered by Disability Resources, their office, and I've hyperlinked them on here so you can go check them out. I've broken down this section into before, during, and after the event. So before the event, number one, develop accessible materials using best practices. This covers everything we talked about in section one and a few more things that I'll talk about in a couple slides. Number two, ensure that meeting locations are accessible. This is for both virtual and in-person events. Do you have captioning on? Can an individual using a wheelchair get into the building? And consider transit options as well. If someone needs to take the bus, how far away from the bus line is it? Number three, include a reservation option that includes an accommodation question. Or if you don't want to get reservations, include contact information for attendees to request accommodations or needs. Number four, arrange additionally needed accommodations. So now that you've collected that information, you can then use it and act on it. This can include having an interpreter present or having a live captioning. Increase knowledge about different types of abilities, needs, and accommodations in order to best meet these accommodation needs. And inform speakers about easy methods to be inclusive. So here are some best practices. Always check accessibility before finalizing your materials. Provide materials before the event. That way, if people do need to make changes so that the materials are accessible or more accommodating, they can do so beforehand. Include multiple methods of learning. Decrease text on slides. It's better to have less text on slides and bigger font than the other way around. Minimize usage of motion and animations. For hybrid events, make sure you're engaging both the virtual and in-person audiences. And if needed, you can use live closed captioning or CART services. On the right, I have an image that shows different shades of text on different shades of backgrounds, which emphasize both color and accessibility. So sometimes when you start trying to improve contrast, it can be difficult to bring color back in because you're like, okay, well, black and white always works. But you can have dark text on yellow, blue, and light colors, or you can have white text on bright colors. However, you shouldn't have yellow, blue, or light text on white, or bright text on white. During the event, there are several considerations that should be used. So for everyone, double check that audio equipment, speakers, and microphones are working. And this is, of course, everyone for when you're virtual, but when it's in person, it'll be the organizers or the speakers. And next, speak clearly and simply with pauses so that everyone can understand you. For student org leaders and speakers, stay visible for attendees so that those who read lips can still do so. Describe any visual material. Use accessible language that is aware of different abilities, identities, and technology, and we can always learn more and improve in this area. And allow for multiple methods of participation so that some people can use the chat and some people can be verbal. For attendees, it's really important to minimize distractions. So that can be sound, making sure you're muted, or lots of visual movement. For some disabilities, that can detract from the event or the overall experience. If you've made it through this training and a lot of this stuff is new to you, I want to make sure that I'm leaving you with this message. We can only do the best we can given our knowledge and our circumstances. It's okay if we didn't know this beforehand. And also, it's okay that we will try to do better and be more accessible and accommodating in the future. So strive for your best and then ask for feedback, because when you get that feedback, you can get even better. My goal is for all student leaders and members who have taken this training is to leave with this call to action. I hope that all student organizations can make at least one impactful change this semester regarding accessibility. And we recommend that you start with your own club. Assess your own club members' accessibility and accommodation needs and make one of those a reality. Thank you so much for attending this training. As I mentioned early on, if you have any additional questions, we are more than happy to help you become more accessible and inclusive on campus. You can just reach out to us at studentorgs@nau.edu. Other offices and departments that may be able to help you would be the Office of Inclusion and then Disability Resources. All three of us working together are here to make a more inclusive student life.